Hello developers, welcome to day 27 of the 30 days of JavaScript challenge. Today marks another opportunity for us to tackle challenges and deepen our understanding of JavaScript concepts. Let's dive in and make the most out of this learning journey. We're just 3 days away, so let's hold on tight. Today's challenge says, given an object or array obj, return a compact object. Then it goes on and explain what a compact object is. So a compact object is the same as the original object except with keys containing falsy values removed. This operation applies to the object and any nested objects. Arrays are considered objects where the indices are keys. We already looked at this. And a value is considered falsy when, if you call that value this boolean function, it returns false. You already looked at this also. Then it continues and says that you may assume that obj is the output of JSON.parse. In other words, it's just a valid JSON object or array. Okay. So the first example, if obj is an array and it contains the elements null, 0, false, and 1, the output will be 1 because you know that null is falsy, 0 is falsy, and false is also falsy. So the output is 1 because 1 is the only truthy value here. Okay. In example 2, it's an object containing two properties. The first, key A and value null. This one will be removed because null, null is falsy. Then the second, key B, and the value is an array containing false and 1. So you can see that an object can contain another iterable inside it. So this is an object containing an array. So you have to iterate through this object. Also, this array should iterate through it. So in this case, you should only remove this first item of the array false, but this one should remain. So the output should only be an object of B with the value array of 1, like that. The third example is an object consisting of arrays, and some of those is it's an array consisting of elements, and one of those elements is an array. So this null is false, it will be removed. 0 is false, it will be removed. 5 is truthy, it will remain. This one is an array. So you have to iterate through it, the items of that array. So you'll just remove this 0 and it will remain the empty array. So this element will still remain because we know that this other is also an array. This false, you'll iterate through it and remove this false, and this 16 will remain. So that is how you're supposed to solve this challenge. Then the constraints are obj is a valid JSON object, and if you convert that obj into the string, then you check the length, it will be between 2 and 10 to the power 6. So that is the challenge. Since you know about the truth and falsy values, you can just dive right into the solution. To solve this challenge, I'll create a function. I'll call it compact object like that. And I'll use the anonymous function syntax. And I'll show that this function should take in an object obj. And this obj can either be an object or an array. So you have two cases there. It can either be an object or an array. So first, let us check if it's an array. So to check if it's an array, you can use this array is array. And if you pass in the object there, if it's an array, it will return true. If it's not an array, it will return false. So if it's an array, this should be truthy and this code inside here should run. So if it's an array, we want to look through that array and filter out the falsy values. So you can use a for loop here to look through the array, then you filter out the falsy values. But there's an inbuilt method that you already learned. It's called the filter method. It does exactly that. So to make our life easier, I'll just use the filter method. I'll just say object.filter. And know that this filter method takes in a callback function. So for each item of that array, I'll call this boolean function on each item. So if this boolean returns true, that item will be returned, and if it returns false, the item will be ignored. That is how we say the filter method works. So let me just store it in a variable here. I'll call it filtered. So this filtered will contain the filtered array that has only truthy values. But we're told that this array can sometimes contain another array inside it. So we have to look through this filtered array to check if one of each items is an array. So you can use the map method to do that. You can also use the follow, but I prefer the map. Or you can also use for each. I'll use map. So I'll look through this filtered array. Then for each item, I'll use an arrow function here to write this callback function. For each item, I'll check if the type of that item is an object. So I'll say if type of, like they did in the other challenge, if type of item is an object, because you know the type of array is also an object. So we'll check if each type is an object to check if it's an array or an object. So if it's an object, what do you want to do? We just want to call this compact object function again. So we'll call it recursively, but this time we'll call it this item like that. And that is what that is how we're supposed to solve it. It's an array. Then at the end of the day, you want to return the output. But here you can just chain these two methods together. So instead of storing it into a variable, I can just call the map here direct on this. I can just say dot filter then dot map like that. Then at the end of the day, I just want to return the result that will be returned by this one. So yeah, so this is how we should solve it if it's an array. Okay, now let us just solve it if it is an object. So if it's an object, we'll just do the same thing. You look through each item of that object, then check if it's truthy. If it's not truthy, that is, if it's falsy, you remove the item, and if it's truthy, you just retain it. And if the item is also an array or an object, you'll call this compact object again recursively. So I'll just do exactly that. Just to remind you, there's this method called object.entries, and if you call it with our object, it will return key value pairs as an array. So I can just put this in let me just put a for loop here. I wanted to surround this with a for loop. So you can say something like for. So I know that this one will return an array of key value pairs. So I can destructure the key and values. So I can just say const. Then I can do array destructuring, destructure the key and the value. Now I'm using a for of loop. So this is a for of loop, and we already talked about how to use this for of loop. Okay, so here I've looped through this object and I've destructured the keys and the values. So now I can access the keys separately and the values separately. Now I want to check if the values are truthy. And you said to check if something is truth, you can either use this boolean or you can use an if condition. So this now I can use an if condition. So I can say if not value. That means if value is false. So if the value is falsy, and to remove that value from this object, and we already discussed about the delete property that removes an item from an object. So I can just say delete that value. That value is of object index key, like that. Then I want to just continue with the loop. So I'll just put the continue keyword here. Continue. Then also there's some cases where the value is an object. So like what we did here, like let me just also copy this code. I'll check if that value is an object. So I'll say if the type of value, in this case not item, the type of value is equals to an object. So if it's an object, I want to call this compact object function again, but with the value, then to store it in this position where it was the object of key, like that. Okay. Then at the end of the day, and after this loop, and to return the object. So I can just return the object down here after it has finished to loop. So I can return the object like that. So yeah, let me just explain this code from the top. So I've created a function that takes in an object, and know that this object can either be an array or an object. So first, to check if it's an array. In this first here, you check if it's an array. So if it's an array, we'll just filter that array to remove the falsy values, this line. Then we'll loop through that filtered array to check if it contains another array or object. So if it contains another array or object, we'll call this function again recursively. So it will just repeat what it did before. It will just repeat these two processes again. Then at the end of the day, we just want to return the results. Okay. Then if it's an object, we are here in the concept you're told that it is a valid JSON object. So it can either be an array or an object, and it has to be a valid JSON object. Okay. So you're sure if it's not an array, it's definitely an object. So it just we are doing this for the object. So if it's the object, we use this object.entries that we learned the previous day to get the keys and the values of that object. Then we'll use array structuring here to destructure each key and value independently. So now I have access to the key and the value. So I'll check if the value is falsy, and I've used this not keyword. So if the value is not true, that means it's falsy. We'll delete that value. Then we'll just continue with the iteration. Then we'll check if that value is an object. If it's an object, I'll just call this function again recursively. So that is how we're supposed to do this. So let me just try this with example 1. Let me just try with example 1. So example 1 is an array. So let me just copy that and write it down here. So since it's an array, I expect it to use this one first. This first for the if here. So okay. So I'll just call the function, it's called compact object. I'll just call compact object with my object obj like that. Then let me just log this so that I can see it in the terminal. So I'll write here console.log. Like that. So if I run this, I expect to just get an array with one item, that is 1. So let me just wait for it to see. I got undefined. Let me check. It looks like I forgot to return this value here. So here I'm supposed to return this value. So if the type of item is an object, you call this function again, then return that value. Then else you should return there. So I can just say else, or I can just return it directly. So else return the item. Okay. So if it's not an object, just return the item. If it's an object, you call this function again, then return that value. I think that is what I missed. So let me just run this code again. Fingers crossed this time. So let's wait for it to run. And indeed I got my array of 1. So that was the issue. So let's try the example 2 and 3 just to be sure. So example 2, it's an object. So I'll just copy this example 2, it's an object. Then I'll paste it here like that. So let me run to see if I'll get an object of 1 property, that is a key of B, and the value of an array of 1. So let us wait for it. And indeed I got the expected output. So that means that our code is fine, but I'll just confirm with example 3 to be extremely sure. So if it passes all the test cases, it means that it's okay. So I'll just test it with example 3 like that. Then I'll run this code. Expect 5, an empty array, and 16. So let's wait for it. And indeed I got the expected results. So that is it for this challenge. See you in the next challenge. Peace out.